It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Reducing the tax take from millions of workers, how the Chancellor's hand was revealed ahead of the budget. Swinging for support with a cut in national insurance, but will it score with key voters? And the questions over what else could be to come. All this as councils plead for more money, and people in the country's second city are told they'll pay higher tax but get less in support.
It's going to put a lot of pressure, and if wages don't go up the same amount or more, people are going to struggle.
Also tonight, the little boy who died a week after he was sent home from A&E. Now his family say the head of the NHS will be asked to look at his case. The not-so-Super Tuesday for opponents of Donald Trump as the former president prepares to take another step back towards the White House. And communications confusion over the Princess of Wales and her long-awaited return to royal duty. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Well, good evening. Normally, it's the night of the budget that we know which multi-billion-pound pledges the Chancellor has made to try to win your support. In this election year, though, it is the day before that the details of a major tax cut has been revealed. And for workers, it is, we understand, a significant one, with a cut in national insurance by a further 2 pence in the pound on top of the previous reduction that the Chancellor made last autumn. It means 27 million working people will see a saving of, on average, £450 per year. We also understand that fuel duty will remain unchanged. A 5p a litre fuel duty reduction due to expire at the end of this month will now be extended for another year. So why is the Chancellor prioritising these areas, and will it deliver for him and his party politically with an election just months or even weeks away? Our first report tonight is from our political editor, Beth Rigby.
A Chancellor putting the final touches on his pre-election budget that could be his last. With so much at stake for Jeremy Hunt's party, as well as his own political prospects, a cut to national insurance coming our way. Miles behind in the polls, the Tories need a huge swing in support to get back into play. But voters in his constituency unsure if Mr Hunt can hold on.
I think he's probably better than his party. I think he's a fairly straightforward MP. He's a good constituency MP. Whether he'll be here after the election, who knows?
Certainly, as a mum of three, I sort of get lost in knowing, sometimes there are promises made, and sometimes it's really hard to trust knowing that those promises are going to come to fruition.
Members of Mr Hunt's local Conservative association say the Chancellor needs to balance tax cuts with spending on public services.
Yes, they would love tax cuts, but everybody realises in their heart of hearts that these have to be afforded.
But news that Mr Hunt donated more than £100,000 of his own money to his local party suggests he knows the fight he's in to remain an MP.
There are large numbers of candidates all over the country, and they're showing their seriousness by putting their money in. We're going to fight a good campaign here, and a strong campaign, and we think that we should prevail.
But a Liberal Democrat takeover is brewing here. Their leader, Ed Davey, on Hunt's patch.
Cheers.
And confident.
I think Jeremy Hunt is in real trouble in his seat from the Liberal Democrats. Everyone can see that the Liberal Democrats are the ones who can win here in Ashton Godalming, but also across Surrey, across the Blue Wall.
The Chancellor will say that this budget proves his economic plan is on track, and he will deliver another £10 billion of tax cuts for workers to prove that point. But whether he says he's delivering for voters or not, you don't appear to be listening. There were tax cuts earlier this year, and yet the polls haven't moved. Indeed, some inside Number 10 tell me quietly they don't expect this budget to be a big poll game changer. And that leaves the question, if this doesn't shift the dial, what next? Conservative MPs want the Chancellor to be bolder.
So we've had national insurance cuts already. We had one in the autumn statement. That is why I think the best way forward would be to balance that out with an income tax cut. And obviously that's a change to the thresholds. Up to 4 million more people will be dragged into paying higher rates of taxation because those thresholds haven't changed by 2029. And I think we need to do something about that.
Amid all the warring Tory factions, there is consensus something needs to change. And if this budget can't do it, many will be asking what can.
Well, Beth is in Downing Street tonight. And Beth, we might well have expected a multi-billion-pound handout to workers to be the centrepiece tomorrow. Will it be enough, though?
Well, Anna, the first thing to say, it's highly unusual that we know this big budget centrepiece the night before. Normally, this would be the rabbit out of the hat, a 2 percentage point cut in national insurance. You remember the Chancellor did this last November and it came into force in January. For 27 million workers across the country, these 2 cuts will represent about £900 back in your pocket for an average worker. And the Chancellor will use this to say that his plan is working, that the UK is turning the corner, that after the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis, that Britain's economy is back on track. And here's a bung to you workers to prove it. And I think he will talk about this, the beginning of permanent tax cuts. But the big question is it enough? Because the Chancellor already cut national insurance last November. It came in January, and since then the polls haven't moved. If anything, they've got worse. It was only one poll, but this week the Conservatives dropped to 20 points in the polls. It's the lowest since polling records began in 1978. And Tory MPs are pulling out their hair, thinking what can be done in order to turn around our fortunes. And I think that with NI cuts, yes, that's welcome, but what you heard from Priti Patel in that piece is what many are talking about, which is they want income tax cuts. They want more cuts. And I have to say that Labour tonight think that potentially that will happen. The Chancellor, now the Prime Minister, but Rishi Sunak back in 2022 when he was Chancellor, promised a 1% cut in income tax by the end of 2024. Look, I think if it doesn't happen tomorrow, he will be under massive pressure to do more later in the year, so watch for a second fiscal event.
Beth, outside number 11, thank you. Well, the leeway for the Chancellor to cut the rate of national insurance comes from the calculation of what's known as headroom in the government's spending plans. That headroom is at a historically low level, though, and based on projections often shown to be wildly wrong, as our economics editor Ed Conway explains.
It's the budget. And what does that mean? It means we're going to have lots of figures, lots of data. We're going to guide you through it all, though, including some important data. This is gross domestic product, the rate at which the economy is growing. These are the forecasts last time around. They'll probably have to be downgraded a little bit in the short run because, why? Well, we're in recession right now. But they might be upgraded off into the future. I'm afraid that's not necessarily because the economy is doing brilliantly right now. It's because you've got really strong population growth, mainly because of immigration, which pushes those bars up. Another chart that's worth just focusing on, this is the tax burden, as some people call it, the amount of taxes we have as a percentage of GDP going all the way back many decades. And if you look at that line, that's the latest projection, you can see it's getting up to the highest level since the aftermath of World War II, an extraordinary statistic there. And the Chancellor says he wants to bring the tax burden down, but he says he's hemmed in by headroom, by the amount of headroom he has. And it's worth just focusing on what is this headroom everyone's going on about? Well, it largely comes back down to the fact that the Chancellor's got 3 fiscal rules, and the most binding of them is that he needs to get the national debt falling. This is their current projection for the national debt, and you can see it's not falling immediately. In fact, it's higher in a few years than it is at the start. But that's the key thing about the rule. The rule says you need to get it down falling between year 4 and year 5. And is that happening? Well, zoom in. Yes, just about. Down from 93.2% of GDP to 92.8% of GDP. And the gap between those two things, that's fiscal headroom. But if you take that bar and kind of work out what that is in cash terms, that's about £13 billion. So when the Chancellor's saying, I've got this fiscal headroom to play with, it's because of that. But a couple of things to note. First of all, take the £13 billion. By historical standards, that's not an enormous amount of headroom versus the kind of rules that different chancellors have had. So there's that £13 billion. Sunak, Hammond, Osborne in the coalition, they tended to have more room to play with against their fiscal rules. But secondly, and broader point here, why is there so much focus on essentially what are forecasts? We're basing a lot of government policy on these lines here. This is the OBR forecasts over the years of national debt, and you can see they forecasts change a lot. They change an awful lot because, of course, the future is unpredictable. And if you look at the gap between the forecasts and what's actually happened, so take this, for instance, that average gap, the 5-year forecast horizon gap, going back the last few years, it's £415 billion. It's a staggering amount, raising the question, why are we basing so much decisions on investment, decisions on spending, decisions on tax on all of this? One of those questions we may have answered, along with many others, in the budget.
Well, the focus tonight may be on the government's plans to boost the pay packets of workers, but the flip side of the spending coin was on display in Birmingham. There, the council, effectively bankrupt, approved £300 million in cuts, as well as an eye-watering increase in council tax. And it's led local people to worry about the services they use, as our Midlands correspondent Becky Cottrell explains.
When Sarah escaped an abusive relationship, she fled to this women's refuge with her young child. She says this place saved her.
Making friends and discovering who I really am meant to be, I suppose. Yeah.
And if you hadn't had this as a place to come, what would it have meant for you?
I probably would be dead.
Most of the refuge's funding comes from Birmingham City Council. The charity is desperately hoping the authority won't cut them and the women they help off.
Our services are not cheap, but one day at mental health institution is costing between £1,000 and £2,000 per day. And we don't want them there, just because they had years of rape and abuse. They deserve better.
Birmingham, Europe's largest local authority, declared effective bankruptcy last year. So have other councils, all pointing to lower grants from central government and rising inflation. But there are other factors here, including an equal pay dispute that could see the council liable for over £1 billion owed to female employees. Over the next 2 years, they're trying to save £300 million through cuts and by raising council tax by 21%. For this, residents will see more infrequent bin collections and less money for their roads.
I'm very sorry that we find ourselves in this position. I'm a Birmingham lad, born and bred. I've lived my entire life here. So, this city matters profoundly to me, as do the communities that I serve as its leader. But I'm really clear as the new leader of this council that we've got to restore the council to financial stability, and we need to take some tough choices in order to do that.
But paying more for less, unsurprisingly, isn't popular.
If you're a working man, it's payouts, payouts.
It's going to put a lot of pressure, and if wages don't go up the same amount or more, people are going to struggle.
And as people here face a bigger bill for slashed services, it's the most vulnerable who stand to be hit the hardest. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Birmingham.
And we'll have more on the budget later on Sky News at 10 when we visit our new Sky News target towns ahead of the election.
They say one thing and do another. They're not in the same position. They've never lived in our shoes.
You've got people with nothing, scraping pennies, and it's frustrating.
Well, disillusionment and frustration in Grimsby and Cleethorpes on the Lincolnshire coast, whose votes will be especially fought over at the general election. The head of the NHS will be asked to look into the death of a 5-year-old boy, his family has told Sky News. The uncle of Yusuf Nazir was speaking after meeting the Health Secretary. Yusuf died in late 2022, a week after he was sent home from a hospital emergency department. A witness present in A&E that night has told us what she saw was truly horrific. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has more.
It's not been a fair investigation.
A family seeking justice and answers, taking their fight to the very heart of government.
What do you hope to achieve today? We just want another investigation into Yusuf's care and Yusuf's death.
5-year-old Yusuf died just days after gasping for breath in A&E. He was sent home with a prescription of antibiotics for severe tonsillitis. His family says an official report into his death omitted key evidence.
They've not commented on Yusuf having choking episodes, having breathing episodes, struggling to breathe, nobody monitoring him. Why has that been taken out?
Do you think if Yusuf had been admitted on the night his mother took him to Rotherham Hospital, he would be alive today?
Yeah, 100%.
The family has slammed the report as a cover-up. It concluded that Yusuf's care was appropriate and admission wasn't necessary. But Sky News has spoken to witnesses who say staff could have done more.
I said to the nurse, there's a lady in there with a little boy, he's really struggling to breathe, he's gasping, is there anyone that can come and help? And she just basically said, if his mum's that concerned, then she needs to bring him to us herself. Picking up a boy who was practically just floppy would have been too much. It were really scary.
Rotherham Hospital told Sky News they were saddened by the tragic circumstances. And sadly, there was nothing that could have been done differently that would have saved Yusuf's life. If an admission had been considered necessary at that point, Yusuf would have been admitted to the children's ward. For a Secretary of State to agree to meet a family that is claiming a whitewash into an official report is highly unusual. And it follows a meeting the family had with the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who's backed calls for a second inquiry. He went on to say no child in this country should be dying of tonsillitis. After an hour-long meeting, the Health Secretary said she would take up the case with NHS England's chief executive.
The Health Secretary said she's going to speak to Amanda Pritchard and see if they can answer the questions and possibly look at another report. This is all we wanted. We want to get another report issued and get the truth out.
No inquiry will bring Yusuf back to his grieving parents. But if another one does address the concerns raised, then it might spare another family the same trauma. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Tonight is often a nail-biter for the candidates attempting to become US president. This year, Super Tuesday is unlikely to deliver a surprise, with Joe Biden standing again for election and Donald Trump so far ahead in the polls. How big the backing that the former president gets from the 15 states deciding their Republican nomination, though, will be keenly watched. Among them are Virginia and North Carolina, from where our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
If Nikki Haley is left behind after today, Biden versus Trump is the race on the horizon. One that will turn on who wins here, in North Carolina and half a dozen swing states like it.
Terrible decisions, terrible leader.
Biden's opponents didn't miss a recent poll that showed most of his supporters think him too old to be effective.
Half the time he doesn't even know where he's at. So, I mean, how does somebody like that lead the country?
Macy, come. He's old as dirt, and I think he's ruining this country.
Immigration, the economy and foreign wars are themes to roll through the campaign. Abortion is an election issue like never before. Republican-driven restrictions on access have handed Democrats votes they didn't previously have.
Thanks for coming out and voting today.
Listen, I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Amen. That's right.
This was Super Tuesday voting at Rockingham in North Carolina.
Hey, ma'am, how are you?
It's solid Trump country, and it shows. What about Nikki Haley? Is she not the answer?
She doesn't ring my bell, that's all. She just doesn't have what it takes, I think. She's going to be too much of a pushover for world affairs. Donald Trump, you know, he puts on his helmet and goes charging at it.
I don't vote for women in big positions.
Why?
Because I believe the Bible, a man should be over a woman.
Pen should be in the booth.
Nikki Haley says she'll remain in this contest as long as she stays competitive. That may not be for much longer. The polls tell us that Super Tuesday will supercharge Donald Trump's status as the would-be Republican nominee. On a day for mapping out America's election road trip, we cross the state line. This was Jam Night in Ferrum, Virginia. Different vibe, different voices.
I am a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I just want to feel safe.
It seems like this country is going more to extremes on either side, to the left and to the right.
I think Donald Trump disrespects women, and Joe Biden is not in control of the country.
The sound of Trump versus Biden isn't what this country wants to hear. Polls consistently reflect their unpopularity. It is the shape of an election campaign to come. Political trench warfare that America doesn't need, with personnel it doesn't want.
And James is in Madison in North Carolina tonight, the one swing state up for grabs this evening. And James, Donald Trump unstoppable, at least for now.
That's right, Anna. Yes, for now. Bear in mind the uncertainty that he carries with him wherever he goes. So that is partly the reason why Nikki Haley remains in this contest thus far. Also the fact that she still has the backing of financial donors who clearly see a value in staying in the race. Should something happen to Donald Trump, perhaps in a courtroom somewhere, then it may pay to still be in the contest, to be presidential nominee with delegates in the back pocket heading towards the summer convention. So the numbers are important. Important tonight to gauge how far ahead Donald Trump is and to what extent he leaps towards the magic figure he needs to be the nominee. It's also significant, Anna, in terms of who doesn't vote for him. The number of people who withhold their support from Donald Trump beyond the MAGA base that he already has in the bag, that will reflect the scale of the challenge he faces in the long term heading towards the November election.
Fascinating night ahead then. James, live there in North Carolina, thank you. And Sky News will, of course, have live coverage of Super Tuesday throughout the night tonight, that is from midnight. Well, the US President Joe Biden said today that a deal to secure a ceasefire in Gaza is in the hands of Hamas now. A delegation from the organisation is staying in Egypt for further talks after 2 days without a breakthrough. Until a few minutes ago, the Ministry of Defence's website had confirmed that the Princess of Wales would be attending this year's Trooping the Colour. It would have been the first official engagement confirmed for Kate post-surgery. That has now been removed, though, after, we understand, Kensington Palace had not been consulted before the announcement. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is outside Buckingham Palace for us tonight. And Rhiannon, communications confusion, it seems, between the royals and the MOD, and this ongoing pressure for more information about how the Princess of Wales is doing.
That's right. The Ministry of Defence certainly today have found out just how intense any information is about the Princess of Wales as people are clamouring to try and find out more about her health condition. So it all relates to this mistake that they made on their website. So this morning it said Trooping the Colour reviewed by the Princess of Wales, which in a way does make sense because she's Colonel of the Irish Guards and they are Trooping the Colour this year. The only problem is the MOD had not confirmed with the Palace that they were able to put that information out there. And Kensington Palace were very quick to remind us that only they can 100% confirm exactly what engagements the Prince and Princess of Wales are due to carry out. Also, on the same website, it also said that the King is due to attend his birthday parade, and that also hasn't been confirmed. So tonight, the MOD have faced that rather embarrassing situation where they've had to take all of that information off of the website. So what exactly do we read into all of it? I think it shows one of the big quandaries that's facing the palace at the moment. They are still trying to plan ahead for some really big events coming up this year, but without fully knowing whether the King or Kate are going to be well enough, although they do keep saying that Kate is recovering well. It also shows that they don't want to confirm any events unless they are 99% certain that they can attend them. Members of the royal family don't like cancelling on anybody. They also don't like sharing personal information. And one thing for certain is Prince William is not going to share any more, despite all the speculation continuing to grow.
Rhiannon, thank you. The Prime Minister told the country last Friday that the streets are being hijacked by groups that don't respect democratic traditions. He was seen as having pro-Palestinian protesters in mind when he warned of mob rule. But those who regularly demonstrate have told us that they have a very different perspective. One said they didn't want to bring about peace with violence. Our Home Affairs editor, Jason Farrell, spoke to her and other protesters last night in North London.
When does protest shift from being a vital part of democracy to threatening it? Outside the town hall in Camden, protesters wanted the council to call a motion for a ceasefire in Gaza. But the Prime Minister last week warned that some demonstrations have crossed the line.
Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. On too many occasions recently, our streets have been hijacked by small groups.
What do you feel about that language?
Well, do you see that this is a hijack? I only see people wanting peace.
What's your take on what Rishi Sunak was trying to do in that speech?
To dehumanise, to delegitimise the struggle, to say that these people are only here for disruption and that by lobbying councils it's not going to make a difference, but it does.
I think when the Prime Minister said what he said, I very much struggle to know where that's coming from, apart from the fact that he wants to stop us.
A notice told protesters they couldn't enter the public gallery.
Right. How do you feel about not being allowed in?
I don't think it's great. I'm not surprised.
Carried out.
It's unsurprising because at the last meeting in January, this happened.
You need to now...
There were multiple disruptions and someone even threw a shoe from the public gallery.
Keep quiet while the leader speaks, otherwise we'll have to stop the meeting.
This time the council also turned down the group's request to formally present their case.
Well, the council say that they're not allowing the protesters to speak at the meeting today because they have other business, they've got a budget to approve, and they also feel that they don't have much influence when it comes to the situation in Gaza.
Kept outside, they held a minute's silence for those killed in the conflict. So what is legitimate protest? Most told me they disagreed with this demonstration outside MP Tobias Ellwood's house, but some supported it.
Listen, they're the ones that are intimidating us. They're the ones that are trying to say...
Not if you're outside their house.
They are trying to say that we can't protest.
Where's the ceasefire?
It was the same Camden Friends of Palestine group who recently shouted at Keir Starmer out with his wife in his constituency.
Complicit in genocide!
This is just a snapshot of a growing fracture between those who say this is breaking down the authority of our institutions and those who feel authority isn't listening. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
And finally, tomorrow's budget can't but be seen in the context of the upcoming general election, whenever that may be. Two towns where the government will be hoping their message especially hits home are Grimsby and Cleethorpes, side by side on the Lincolnshire coast. In the run-up to the election, they'll become our target towns. Why? Well, politically, Great Grimsby has long been seen as a Labour stronghold, but in 2019 turned Conservative for the first time since the end of the Second World War. Cleethorpes, which only became a constituency in 1997, was Labour until 2010. At the next election, the two will be combined into a new constituency, which Labour needs an 11.7-point swing to win, close to the level it needs nationally to win a majority. Well, who lives there? A higher proportion than average are white, working-class Leave voters. And as our national correspondent Tom Parmond reports, times are tight for many.
The rows of old shoes in here are getting longer, each waiting to be repaired.
We get a lot of people now who are digging out old shoes, or they're buying them from charity shops, and they might be 20, 30 or 40 years old, these shoes, you know, and we're renovating them. It is a reflection. And some of the things I do to shoes, I just think they're not worth it, but they insist that I do them. But that's where we're at.
There's no price list in the cobbler's shop because the cost of everything keeps going up.
I mean, there's a divide which is as big as it's ever been. We've got a group with shed loads of money, and you've got people with nothing, you know, scraping pennies, and it's frustrating.
Suzanne can repair almost anything, but has lost faith in what she sees as a broken political system.
It's like they've took the heart out, haven't they? They'll just take the heart out of the whole country and just say, no, you don't like this if we don't need it somehow.
But what of the future here? Much needed investment is promised in Grimsby. In the last specialist children's shoe shop in town, we met Willow and her mum Katie.
It almost feels like a privilege, like, you know, a new pair of shoes.
She'd love to be back at work, but right now she can't put Willow into nursery. Despite government attempts to fix childcare, Katie still can't afford it.
I wish she could have had that opportunity, but financially I'm not in that position to pay. I can't pay nursery fees. You know, I don't have that money. It's not a choice.
Her mum Karen wants to be helping more with Willow, but she can't afford to retire or even cut back her hours. To say she's hacked off with politicians is an understatement.
In all honesty, I think people have given up listening to what they say because they say one thing and do another. They're not in the same position. They've never lived in our shoes.
What would you want to see the government doing for you and for this town?
To have more spare money, especially like tax out of my wages and things, to have more spare money. Not to go out, but to be able to live.
From people we've spoken to here, it's clear they long to get Grimsby back on its feet, to close the divide and afford to live again. Whatever politicians say, that hasn't happened yet. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
And we'll be back in Grimsby and Cleethorpes tomorrow for reaction to the budget, and in the weeks and months to come. Our coverage of the budget itself begins at 11 o'clock in the morning. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers and the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Great to see both of you. And with the budget dominating, of course, this is what the Telegraph's take, with it headlining tax cuts, sparked talk of an election. We will be right back with that and plenty more. Well, this is Sky News in just a moment. The press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. Sky News understands the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, will cut national insurance by 2 pence in the pound in tomorrow's budget and leave fuel duty unchanged. Birmingham City Council, which is effectively bankrupt, has approved £300 million in cuts and an increase in council tax of 21% over 2 years. Plus, voters in parts of the United States are deciding who will represent their party in what's known as Super Tuesday. It could be decisive for Donald Trump's bid to secure the Republican nomination. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you. So let's check out the front pages then, shall we? Starting with The Guardian, which says Jeremy Hunt will use his final budget before the election to promise voters lower tax and higher growth, which could be at the expense of public services. The Financial Times adds on the Chancellor's plan to cut national insurance rates and scrapping non-dom regime. The Telegraph reports on the speculation of an early election as it looks ahead to the budget. While the Eye says shadow ministers fear that if Labour takes office, they'll be forced to announce cuts to spending as Jeremy Hunt looks at cutting national insurance once again. The Metro reporting on the British Army announcing the Princess's attendance to the Trooping the Colour ceremony in June, which has now been deleted from their website and which the palace has not confirmed. The Daily Mirror says the bond between Prince William, Harry and Kate was broken when Meghan arrived on the scene, attributing the claim to the Princess of Wales's uncle. The Daily Mail runs an exclusive on SAS soldiers facing possible murder charges over the death of a suspected jihadist in Syria. Well, a quick reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head straight to Ali Miraj and Sonia Soda. Do love a budget, I have to say. A budget and an election. We've got both tonight, so it's perfect. Anyway, so to the FT, first of all, we've heard parts of what's happening. Ali, you take it away. What else can they add?
Well, it's already been pretty well briefed, quite frankly, so unless there's some rabbit in the hat tomorrow, it's all going to be rather boring. What we understand is that the Chancellor will announce tomorrow a further 2p reduction in national insurance. It's basically a tax cut for workers. It repeats exactly what happened in the autumn statement. It's going to cost 10 billion to the Exchequer, this tax cut. But I think there was some consternation in number 10, or at least this is what we understand, that Rishi Sunak would have wanted ideally to have an income tax cut. It's more headline grabbing. And we also know that following the last time they cut national insurance, in the autumn statement, it made not a blind bit of difference to the polls at all. And frankly, I don't think this is either. People have tuned out of the Tories. They're 20 points behind in the polls, and that's putting it generously. This is going to make no difference at all.
But if it is £450 a year for the average worker, times 2, you start to see the impact, don't you, in your pay packet? And it being for workers, that's exactly what they want. They want people to start working. It's all the benefits drive as well, isn't it? So that is central, really, to the Conservative cause right now.
It is, and it has prompted a lot of speculation about whether the Conservatives are eyeing up an earlier election than many people might have expected, i.e. May. But the issue is that you put that £450 per average worker tax cut into context of everything that's happened since the financial crisis. Stagnating living standards. Living standards are not going to be back at the point at which they were on the brink of the financial crisis until, I think it's, the late 2020s. What's happened with energy bills. That £450 actually starts to dwindle when you put it in the context of what's happened to people's household budgets. And then that's before what you look at, but before what's happened to public services. And I think this is a massive substantive concern about offering such a big tax cut at this time, which is the country simply cannot afford it. If you look at the NHS, we've got the longest waiting list in the NHS's history. If you look at what's going on with local councils that have had their funding cuts, we've had both Conservative and Labour councils on the brink of bankruptcy. We've had services
But this will be tackled by the Chancellor tomorrow. We've had some words from him, embargoed to about now. In recent times, the UK economy has dealt with a financial crisis, a pandemic and an energy shock caused by a war on the European continent. Yet despite the most challenging economic headwinds in modern history, under Conservative government since 2010, growth has been higher than every large European economy. Unemployment has halved, absolute poverty has gone down, and there are 800 more people in jobs for every single day that we've been in office. So he's trying to head off that.
He is,
pointing
but
out
I think
these enormous economic shocks that they've had to deal with.
Yeah, but that's a very selective reading of the facts. And it's true that there have been some really significant external shocks to the economy. I mean, no one's going to deny that, and they've been global. If you look at things like the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the impact it had on energy prices. But the government has made it worse through political choices. Brexit was one of those choices, to go for a very hard Brexit. There's absolutely no question that that has affected our productivity. It's hit exporting businesses really hard. But we've also got longer-term structural issues in the economy, a lack of business investment, a lack of public investment, which can act as an engine, a trigger for business investment. You know, if you look at our rates of business investment compared to, say, you know, some of our continental competitors, if you look at the US...
Well, he's going to talk about that as well, you know, the idea of growth. He says in this statement tonight, Conservatives know lower tax means higher growth, and higher growth means more opportunity and more prosperity.
But there is no evidence. This is the thing, there's no evidence that cutting taxes across the board lead to higher growth. Actually, if you look at the international evidence, if you look at...
Let Ali have a go,
No, but these are, you know, this is a
really
key
crucial
economic
points, yeah.
argument. Like, so, yes, people on the right think that tax cuts lead to growth, but tax cuts aren't going to lead to business investment. We need business investment. That is the engine of the economy. There is absolutely no plan for that. The UK has got historically low levels of productivity growth, and it's a massive issue.
Well, productivity's in the doldrums and has been for 15 years. We're in a technical recession. Look, I do think we have to cut the government some slack here, to the extent that they spent $400 billion on the back of COVID. So there was a lot of spending that came on, the furlough scheme, and the government acted very swiftly on that. And we've all got to realise that on the back of a huge fiscal implication like that on the economy, that there is going to be a huge knock-on effect. I mean, we all have to recognise this. We do have to pay for this. This is why I'm a tax cutter at heart. But even I understand that at this moment, when you've got people still striking the public sector, you've got junior doctors still on strike, people in the public sector wanting pay rises, you can't have a situation where our public services are underfunded. So now is not the time for tax cuts. And this particular one is going to make no difference at all, because national insurance, it didn't move the polls at all. As for the May election, quite honestly, I don't buy it. I really don't buy it.
I don't buy it either.
I think
you mean having the election at the time of the May election?
I'd love the Tories to go to the country early, because I think they absolutely should, because I think people are tired of them. But I just can't see it happening.
Well, he also, you know, the words he's used this week have been responsible, stability, sound money. The quote on that they've issued from the Treasury tonight: an economy based on sound money does not pass on its bills to the next generation. Talking about borrowing, obviously, there. And when it comes to borrowing, he said, some believe there was a choice between responsibility and compassion. They are wrong. It is only because we responsibly reduced the deficit by 80% between 2010 and 2019 that we could generously provide $400 billion to help families and businesses in the pandemic. So it's almost like, it feels like what we're getting is a history lesson of the last 14 years of the Conservatives being in power, and a justification for what we've seen.
It's a selective reading of history, isn't it? Because when they did those, so if you look at the austerity that took place, they actually did cut back tax credits for low-income working families hugely. At the same time, they gave very expensive tax cuts that disproportionately went to better-off households. It was a political choice. So, you know, obviously the Chancellor isn't going to say that in his statement. He's giving us the spin.
Well, Rachel Reeves has also issued a statement, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. This budget should be the final chapter of 14 years of economic failure under the Conservatives that has left Britain worse off. You'll like this one, Sonia. The Conservatives promised to fix the nation's roof, but instead they've smashed the windows, kicked the door in, and are now burning the house down. So there we are.
That's quite the metaphor, isn't it? They've really gone for it there in that press release.
In the meantime, quick look at The Guardian as well. Hunt defies public services alarm with pre-election budget tax cuts. And the whole point about this, it's not just what we'll be given by the Chancellor or taken away in terms of non-dom and vaping tax or whatever might come. Yeah. It's also about the money that each department will have. And we know that some have ring-fenced more money than others. You know, for example, defence. So we know that some departments, you know, will feel the squeeze.
Well, some departments will feel the squeeze, and local councils are also feeling the squeeze. I mean, you saw today Birmingham has just announced 300 million of cuts to its services. So this is going to be really, really tough. It's a tough period. But the interesting thing is, despite what the Chancellor is saying about potential this cut to national insurance tomorrow, he's also talking about the fact that you can't have unlimited migration as part of this whole exercise. And I just leave my head sort of scratching, thinking, hang on a second. This is the party that's just presided over 1.2 million net migration in the past 2 years. And they've been in power for 14 years now, and many of those years have been outside the EU, so they can't blame the EU either for the old open borders thing. So, frankly, I think it's too little too late now for the Tories to start talking about controlling migration and cutting taxes. And by the way, if they really wanted to make a big impact, they would have actually looked at raising the tax thresholds, which have been frozen, which is basically a stealth tax, because they're not rising in line with inflation.
Yeah, you're not the only person who is demanding that, certainly. Just to look at the eye, Labour fears this Tory budget trap will set a trap as Hunt cuts national insurance by 2p in this giveaway, they say. Certainly on non-DOMs, that would steal the Labour's thunder, would it not?
That was a Labour policy that the Conservatives
and they would then spend
and...
that money they had raised, so thereby cutting back on what they might be able to raise.
Yes, absolutely.
If it comes in, of course.
Yes, and the reason why it's a trap is because Jeremy Hunt has got this extremely arbitrary fiscal rule, which is that debt has to be falling as a proportion of GDP in 5 years' time in the projections. I mean, it's like literally meaningless. The Institute for Fiscal Studies director said basically said it's not a rule that makes sense. But Rachel Reeves, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, has effectively adopted Labour's own version of that rule. So, a Labour government, if it gets elected, will have tied itself to Conservative spending plans. So that means that going into a general election, when the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, makes these decisions, sort of steals one of Labour's tax rises that would hit non-DOMs and saying, well, actually, I'm going to spend that on what I want to do, it kind of pulls the rug from under Labour's feet. And I think it is going to be tricky for Labour if it gets into government. It's, if it chooses to play by those fiscal rules, and if it's not going to put taxes up, it's going to be very constrained in what it can do as a government.
OK, sorry to rush you. Got so much to talk about tonight. Plenty more from the papers coming up as well, including this on the front of tomorrow's Metro. The palace's anger at a Kate date clanger, the paper says there.
I think that when we're looking across history, that empires are a fundamental part of our history. They were the fundamental part of world order. And if we're thinking about this within the wider context, King George III himself in the 1750s argued for the abolition of slavery. He argued that it was immoral. We know that Queen Victoria, for example, was incredibly kind to the Muslim community in the United Kingdom. And so ultimately, when we're looking throughout history, it's very difficult to actually make these specific arguments for who should be paying reparations. I'm half Moroccan. Should the Moroccan kingdom be paying reparations to Cornish people for the Barbary slave trade? It's very difficult to actually pin down where these arguments should be lying and actually where these reparations or these apologies should be kept.
King Charles, this is the man who is obviously head of state, head of the Church of England, and ultimately decided to commission the first monarch to commission a report into the royal family's links into the slave trade. So this is a man who was very much centred around equality, right? So this is a good thing. In terms of who should pay it, that's ultimately your point. Well, it starts with King Charles, let's just be clear. The monarchy advocated and benefited from the slave trade. We're talking 3.4 million people that were transported from the African continent into the Americas and the Caribbean, 450,000 of which died during the process. Monarchy advocated and benefited from that. We also have the fact that the slave owners were compensated, so people like you, people like me, paid as taxpayers for the slave owners' declaration or agreement that was sorted out 400 years ago. in the past.
King Charles is not personally responsible. Nobody today is personally responsible for the slave trade. And I hear your point, and I hear the fact that racism still exists today, and many of the institutional difficulties that we see today stem from these historical grievances.
Yes, thank you.
However, nobody today caused the slave trade.
Yeah.
Nobody alive today financially benefits from the slave trade today. And so I think it's incredibly, I think, disingenuous to actually look at these arguments and actually say that we can trace back exactly who benefited, where benefited.
But we can.
No, we cannot.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me tonight, the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome back to both of you. Royal coverage to the Metro, Palace's anger at Kate Date Clanger. This is the MOD suggesting she would be at an event in June. Did not seem to tell Kensington Palace it was about to go on the MOD website, Sonia. So it's been removed already, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it's obviously incredibly sensitive because she had what was probably major surgery in December. She was in hospital for 3 weeks, came out in late January, and she's not doing anything public, we've been told, the public's been told, until Easter. So it's been tricky for the palace to handle because there's been huge speculation about her health. I think partly because of the news about the King having cancer, and then because Prince William had to pull out at very short notice of a memorial service for his godfather in Windsor, and that's prompted crazy speculation online about her health and whether she's okay and what might be the root of it. So it's very sensitive. And so for the army to say, well, we've got this event, the Trooping of the Colour, someone made an assumption clearly because of a role she plays in relation to the army, that she was going to be there, put it on the website, and the world's media said, oh, excellent, this is a palace announcing that she's going to be definitely back doing public duties in early June. And so it is very embarrassing for the MOD, and they've basically had to take her off the website. So I think the palace will probably be extremely annoyed about how it's all played out.
And we've had a paparazzi photograph as well, used by US media, but not in this country. Some suggestions that actually Kensington Palace should have just had a photo, even if it's a selfie with Prince William, to put all of this, speculation to rest or something, and to stop the value for paps of getting these photographs and selling them. But the Mirror, in a sense, to stir the pot further, has the uncle, Kate's Uncle Gary.
Well, he's going on Celebrity Big Brother. Now, obviously
It's enough to make anyone's heart just sink, isn't it, if it's your uncle?
Well, I mean, the producers of Celebrity Big Brother, I mean, he's there because he's linked to the royal family, right? Remotely. But that's what he's there for. Now, apparently, Kate's mother is very, very upset about this. And she's read the riot act, but he's still going in. And he's promised not to spill the beans on anything related to the royal family materially, but he's already stirring the pot with Harry, saying he threw his family under the bus and all this sort of stuff. I mean, look, to be fair to the guy, he owns a villa in Ibiza, which is like, apparently we read.
How was that relevant to anything?
Well, I mean, I love Ibiza, so, fair play. And he made 70 million quid from selling a company, so he's a reasonably successful guy. But clearly he's there for that reason. I mean, Celebrity Big Brother, I mean, it's a bit scraping the bottom of the barrel.
And there's definitely been some, allegations in his past less
Well,
savoury associations. Yeah.
This story is that Prince William, Harry and Kate's happy bond was shattered when Meghan arrived on the scene. Gary Goldsmith accused the Duchess of putting a stick in the spokes, creating drama and rewriting history. And the whole point is there's, you know, days and, well, how long are they in it for? Is it weeks now?
I think Celebrity Big Brother is 3 weeks, but you've just
weeks,
got to think, it's the last thing the royal family needs. I mean, they've had quite the few months. It's been pretty terrible. There's this huge rift. We're all seeing this massive family row play out in public. The last thing they need is an uncle to go on Big Brother.
Tabloids will lap it up. We will see you soon. Thank you both very much indeed. Ali, Sonia, thank you. See you in the 11. Here's the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, Atlantic rain belts will be pushed back this week as high pressure builds over Scandinavia. This will bring a mild southeasterly flow and more settled weather conditions. Northern Ireland and western parts of the UK mainland will see a cold night under clear skies.